My name is Erin Sorenson. I'm the founder of Third Stage Consulting. I've been an impact producer for quite a while, and I work out of Ventura, California, which is about an hour north of Los Angeles. In fact, that's one of the beautiful things about impact production is that all of us come from very different perspectives. I mean, maybe someday everyone will have to come from a similar, but it's really one of the beauties of impact production is that my background is in social work, and other impact producers come from film, or they come from history, or they come from, global degree in global events, or they come in as an activist, or maybe they got started in a film and they worked for an organization, or they were an activist somewhere else and became interested in this, and so continued to apply their interest into impact production, maybe journalism. So people come from all over, and I think what's great about that is that it is a small community. It's a small community of impact producers, and the more we get to know each other, we're very generous with one another in terms of sharing information, sharing clients, if referring to one another. But it's really, I think, about the skill set that you bring. So if you come from any place, but especially if you come from a place that's non-traditional in terms of working with film, like me, you have to look at the skills that you have, take back, and not how those skills were specifically applied, the job that you left or the profession that you left, but how can you take those skills and apply them to impact production. So one of the things I did running this organization with abused children is that I had to work with a lot of different people that had very different perspectives, and some of them were hostile to one another. And my job was to help everybody work together so that we could work on behalf of these abused kids. And so that was the thing everyone had in common. Everybody wanted to work and make things better for abused kids, make the system better, but they didn't know how. And I think that was one of the gifts that I had, that I was able to hear everybody's point of view and try to find the similarities and introduce each of them to the similarities. And as a result, we were able to build a big building, and we had 100 people that worked in there, and we developed policies and procedures that really changed the way the city of Chicago, anyway, worked with children who were sexually abused. So then coming into impact production, those were the skills I brought to it for me, were kind of knowing how to talk with people, that I can try to really listen to what their interests are, and then take those interests as the place where I can lead from, and when I'm talking to other people, to get them all to work together. And sometimes it's not as dramatic as it was with the Advocacy Center, but I think it has a lot to do with my sense of leveraging, and how do we leverage one source, one person who is an amazing resource in and of themselves, and build what they're doing, or complement what they're doing with someone else that I might meet. And so I think that's really, and I think a lot of impact producers find that it's really a wonderful thing, because we have access and interest in meeting so many different kinds of people towards a common goal, where those people individually may not know one another. So it's also a really cool thing about impact production. I know it's a long answer, but that's my thought on it. A lot of people ask about that, like, how did you become a social worker and doing this? But it's not such a huge leap. I've been a producer since 2008. They didn't call it impact production when I started, and I think Farid told me the same story, that all of a sudden, one day I was in a meeting with Doc Society at the time. It was Brit Doc, with Beatty and Jess. And they both announced that they had come up with a term for this job that I had been doing, and that many of us have been doing. We just didn't know. I just called it somebody. I just said, well, I work with filmmakers to help them make their films do something important. And then we had a name. So that was great. So yeah, I've been doing it. And I was a social worker before that for about 20 years. And so it really was a second career for me that I just adore. And I adored being a social worker. And I feel like, I've always had a real interest in the arts and in film. So being able to take my skills that I learned as a social worker and apply them to an area of the arts has been, just a dream, and just a blessing for me. So yeah, but I've worked on about 60 films at this point in various capacities, from small kind of little areas to big ones. And so I've been, I've been doing it. I've been doing it for a while. So in terms of being an impact producer coming from a background of social work versus one of filmmaking, I think that one reason it might be helpful is that I'm always in a constant sense of learning, because there's no competition. I don't have ideas for the film. Sometimes I'm asked, but I'm really not the filmmaker. So I'm very respectful of those boundaries, and sometimes, remind them to have faith in what they're doing and in their story and what motivated them to tell this story in the first place. And I think that can be helpful as somebody who's not a filmmaker, because I'm an outside opinion and I'm also looking at it when I come in, depending on the stage of the film. I don't really say anything about how the film might have an impact, because I think it's important for films to be independent and not to be made with impact necessarily in the front of their mind, but to tell the story that they're telling. And then I look at, well, where do I think the impact might happen? And so I think that, all of us have different ways of getting to the same place. And coming from my background, I feel like that I have a real desire to work with film subjects, which is one, because I think they're very interesting. I like people, I like talking with them, and I have a lot of experience working with vulnerable people as a social worker. And I think that those skills can apply to my work with subjects of film documentaries. I think also that we all have such different backgrounds. And so, while working with subjects or feeling like, I can be supportive to filmmakers in a way that's very personal, or I can talk with other social workers, like organizations that we're working with. Off of them, many of them are social work organizations, and so I'm very comfortable talking with them and know somewhat about what's important to them and how the film can be used for their mission. I know who to talk to within those organizations to get the most. The biggest opportunity for them to listen to me and let me pitch them. But I'm not really crazy about putting budgets together, for example, and for an impact campaign, that's really important. Some filmmakers do put the budget together, and then some of them actually manage that budget. That's not something that I like to do, but there are folks that do come from a background where that is their interest and that's their skill. So they do that very well. Others have a very sort of a task defined approach to impact production. They have worked with a filmmaker to come up with a common goal, and they have figured out how many hours that would take. And then they are very disciplined about the amount of time that they're spending on a campaign, is to make sure that everybody is on the same page and that people are compensated well. And I've never been able to do that either. So I tend to be more fluid. I look for changing opportunities, and I like to go, kind of go with the flow. I find that with longer impact productions, campaigns, it's very difficult to always predict where something's going to go, and at the beginning. And so I think that's the part to me that I love, like that you're coming into a campaign thinking it's going to be this, but then as you start to meet people and we're open and curious, we find that the campaign might be something else. So I think that that's a big difference. Some people feel very comfortable, and some people really rejoice, with those opportunities. So it's really different. All of us bring something different together. And I think people that come from the arts are also very interesting. They can put together some absolutely visually stimulating, amazing work with campaigns that can just sometimes being public installations, public performances. I think there's some really fantastic artists that are also doing impact work. And activists too, I should say. And I think that's also part of it. And that's all I'll say, is that it's a willingness to stay, like for you to know as you're going into an impact campaign, the kind of impact campaign is and how long you're willing to stay with it. And I think coming from a social work perspective, where we're used to working with people, that it's a long story, that change doesn't happen overnight, that these systems are very hard to change, that I have a lot of patience for it and can feel like I can find the small changes that can lead to a big change. But I'm also understanding how hard it is to make a small change. And so I think that that comes from working with people that had, some serious problems that they were facing in their life, and to celebrate the small improvements as things went along. So that's how I think it's a little bit different. Yeah. Well, the longest campaigns I've worked on were, right now I'm working on one that's one of the longest, Jacinta, about a young woman who has been in and out of prison, following her mother, who is also in and out of prison. And it's about her struggle to deal with that reality for herself, and then also maintain a relationship with her daughter. So I've been with that one almost 5 years at this point, and I was with them for probably 2 years, 2.5 years before the film was even finished. So and I'm still on it, so that continues to be a long campaign. The other that I worked on was earlier in my career, The Home Stretch, which was a film about 3 homeless youth as they struggled to finish high school. It's a really beautiful film. And that one, similar, I came on later in production, but it was still very much in production. And that gave me a long time to develop relationships with the organizations that we would then be working with. Same with Jacinta, it gave me a long time to develop those relationships, which by the time the films come out, you really are well positioned to make those films do something. And so those were the 2. Homestretch I probably was on almost 5 years, but those are exceptions. And most of my campaigns last for, well, it depends like what kind of a campaign it is, but sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years. But I'd say usually 18 months, around 18 months, 2 years, depending on what it is I'm doing and when it is that I've come in. So yeah. So those, I think for sure that's not typical, and it's not really typical, I think, for most impact producers, but it has for me. What that means to me, if I've been with a campaign that long, is that I have volunteered a lot of my time, because I absolutely love the film and love the filmmakers and have belief in the importance of the film. And so those long campaigns are difficult to maintain financially, but they're some of the best campaigns that I'll ever, I'll be the proudest of those longer campaigns, as long as I live. Yeah. I think when you put your strategy together, when you start to really dig into what your campaign is going to be, and you develop your strategy for it, which is very specific. It's an operational strategy where now it's not just goals, but you're saying, okay, what are my objectives? How am I going to you're creating the path, you've built your boat, but you're not on the water yet, and you haven't made it to the island. The island is where you want to go. It's a beautiful, tropical, wonderful place, but the roads are going to be choppy, the seas are going to be choppy, but you've built a good boat. So the budget that you have and so part of creating that boat is you have to create a budget, but you're creating a budget, that is kind of a fantasy, honestly, at that point, unless you're lucky, and it's rare. I don't think I've ever had this in all my situations, but on my campaigns, but I think that you put together a budget based on your strategy and based on your best guess of who are the people that you need to have on your campaign, and when do you think they're going to come in, and what funders do you currently have, if you have any, and what funders do you think would be good prospects, which then of course require a lot of research to find that. And so you don't really know. So your budget is kind of a best guess. So I never come in ever. I think that's something I tell filmmakers, that just because we have a budget of X amount doesn't mean that the first person we talk to is going to give us that full amount. I've never worked on a campaign where the budget was fully funded early on. And in fact, most of the campaigns I work on, when we look back on the budgets that we've done, do not match the budget. And typically it's less. It's that you've come in with less. But what you do throughout the budget is that you determine kind of what are your most essential campaign activities, and what are things that you kind of wish for, even though they all might seem important. It's good to know that. So when you really are starting to realize you have less money, that you don't feel like you can't do anything, that there's still a lot you can do, because you've created either phases of the campaign or you've created segments of the campaign that all of them might have different budgets. So yes, I've budgeted the films to the campaigns to stay alive, but no, do the budgets ever get fully funded? Almost never, almost never. But again, that's thinking through in the beginning, like, what are your priorities? And you know, like some of the activities in your campaign might be kind of a best guess too, and kind of a wish. And then as the campaign moves along, you find, oh my gosh, this group of people would rather use the film than these people that I thought about. Let's shift gears. And like talking about like why I like to do this work, I like that. I look for those opportunities. I have lots of examples of those, but it's kind of one of the things that make the project, you know, make these campaigns really worthwhile. But budgeting, yeah, so number one, it's hard, and number two, it's a best guess in the beginning, and it's and you should be willing to flex with it, understanding that some funders will come in and want to fund one part of your campaign, or may, if you have government sort of campaign goals that are government change related, a private funder may not be able to legally fund those types of campaigns. So you want to also be sure that when you're talking with a funder, that you know what it is they can fund, what can they support, so that you can be very specific. Because when a budget, especially early on, when a funder sees a budget and they say, oh my gosh, it's $250,000 US, they feel like I can only give 30,000. They may feel like, well, like my money doesn't count, it's not going to do anything. But if you have your budget arranged so that you can say $30,000 is going to be great for us to start, or to create a full strategy, and also start to think about our initial phase one execution, or to put you know, an educational guide together. So there are really specific things that $30,000 is actually a lot of money, $10,000, depending on how you want to use it, but you'll have thought all of that through. And so I think that's been important, is to really know that, go into it understanding that your budget will not be fully funded, really have a plan as to what you need to do, and segment the types of money that you would like to look for with funders, so that you can also feel good, like, okay, we didn't get 250,000, but we were still able to get X amount, and we, as a result, we created this, or we made this change, or we got, you know, the film shown with these types of audiences. Because you start to look, the other thing that you start to do once people become very engaged and thrilled about the campaign and excited by it, is people will start to give to you. You know, they'll start to donate, and you might, as well as an impact producer, people, you know, once you really believe in a film, in a campaign, you might start bringing in your friends or other contacts that you have that you think they might be able to donate social media for a little while, for example, or they might have editing skills, and maybe you need to create a film that needs smaller pieces of clips of the film that are going to be used with it for educational materials. Maybe you can find somebody that could donate some of their time for that. And so you do start to see that things that you would ideally have somebody else do, design is a big one. People like to design. There's a lot of people with really good taste, but we put it in the budget to design, you know, materials or guides, discussion guides, etc. But you can find really good designers that might be really willing, because of the issue that it's an opportunity for them. Most people that are in those fields that are not film related, it's a really exciting prospect for them to be able to work on a film and have that be displayed somewhere, have their work be displayed. And so it is, you know, it's good to keep your contacts and not be afraid to ask somebody, because you're asking them to support an issue, a mission to fill in the blanks, whatever the issue is in the film. You're not asking them for a personal favor. You're offering an opportunity for somebody to get involved in a campaign that is there to do social good. So yeah, budgeting is it is a best guess, and I think it's good to know that when you come in, and to not have expectations that budget will be met right away, or that will ever be met. And the other last thing I'll say about budgets is it's hard to get that first bit of money. It is really hard, because people want to fund for whatever reason, I thought this as a social worker too when I was raising money. People don't want to fund things when they don't know if it's going to be successful. And so most funders don't want to take that chance of putting money in and not knowing if their money's going to be result in anything. And so they like to come in at the end when you really needed that money. You wish you had that money in the front. But a lot of more funding comes in at the end when they're able to see that the film is rolling or the campaign is having movement, it's having impact. Then that's where I see funding as being much easier to come in. But in the beginning, it's hard. And so to really look, I think for those early funders, there are some good funders. I think some of the like Doc Society is a good place to start looking. Like that's where you really want to look, I think, for people that are organizations and funders that will fund a dream because they understand that it's hard to get something going with other types of funders. And so I think that that's really important to know about budgeting. Well, it's a really great question. And I think as the campaign moves forward, impact producers are faced with that because you have multiple partners and they represent different things. And so what I like to do is define what partners are and what I think they can give the campaign. So those early partners that you're talking about that were maybe consultants for the film while the film was being made, and because they have expertise, that those partners that were able to give you that kind of time and excitement about the film and encouragement, those I would consider my sort of pivotal partners. They're the ones that are they're part of the campaign as far as I'm concerned. So sometimes as an impact producer, the filmmaker has already developed some really terrific relationships. So one of the first things I want to do is have be introduced to those partners. And then I start to set up calls with them and to talk in depth about their experience, because I'm learning too. Then I have a learning curve. I'm not an expert because I work on different campaigns. I'm not an expert in these issues. I mean, some of them over time, like if it was a film about child abuse, which I've had one of those, I would say, yeah, I have some expertise in that. I have a little more expertise in domestic violence. So I've done a number of films there. I think homelessness, I understood it more. So I think, you start to look at what your wheelhouse is in terms of what you already know, what you're bringing to the table. But most cases, even in the things you think you know a lot about, you can really learn from people because they're currently in it. They're working boots on the ground. They're in it. And so, I think you want to learn. And so for somebody to be willing to teach you, it requires a real commitment to the campaign, to the film. And they have ideas already because that's why they're working with you. They already are starting to think about how they can use the film. So I think that those pivotal partners are the ones that I stay closest to, that I, in many cases, become friends with. There's campaigns that I've had years ago where I'm still friends with those partners that work for organizations. When I go into town, I might stay in their apartments because I want to know what they're doing and they want to know what I'm doing. And they've just become friends. I've gone to weddings. I've been, one of the first to know if they've gotten a promotion or, something. So those are people that I think you look at them as if they're going to be there for you as a friend, because you also like them. You want to find people that you like and you get along with, and they're not intimidating, and you're not, intimidated by them, and they're not intimidated by you. And, so you want those people. Those are if you think about it as concentric circles, those are really with you. Those are people that you sometimes wish they were getting paid as well, because they put in time. They give you consultation about the campaign. They might help you write certain pieces of it. They introduce you to people. They can tell you sometimes like, oh, you should look for funding here, maybe go in on a project where we can both be funded. They introduce you to audiences later on. So they're really, really important people. Also, when you're writing for money, talking about budgeting, to have those partnerships in place, almost like references, is really important to early funding as well. So if you come into it, and I've seen this with films too, when I say, okay, who are your partners? They give me a long list of people that they are hoping will be their partners, that maybe will be their partners, but they haven't even talked with them yet. So when you're going for funding, that they're going to say, a funder would say, and it's reasonable, like, well, have you talked with so-and-so that you think is going to be a funder? Are they willing to be behind it, even if they haven't done anything? And so many cases, they haven't. It's kind of either they haven't had time or for whatever reason, they haven't. And so that is part of the difficulty, I think, in getting early funding. And so bringing an impact producer on early, if you don't already have those campaigns, that could be a very reasonable expectation, is that the impact producer make those relationships for you. And I have done that on more films than I've done with films that are bringing in some support. But whatever it is, if they are coming in, you have some core partners that are coming in, that's a blessing, you have them. And if you don't have them, they need to be identified so that the impact producer or the filmmaker, whoever, a lot of times it's a team, will go out and make those relationships. One of the things that I'll credit to being a social worker is listening to people, whether it's a family, if you've come from a family therapist perspective, a family therapy, you might understand that when the family gets together, that there are certain people that that are wanting different things and or are fighting or don't get along, or there's just a big misunderstanding. And so knowing that, and that's not the way it is with funders, but sometimes filmmakers will come into a conversation with a potential promotional partner. Now that's different. So there's the pivotal partners, and then the next tier out are those organizations that have missions where your film is going to be very interesting to them. And so, and they will have a membership, they'll have a network that you're hoping to work with them to get the film out, to promote the film in a way that's not promoting it to a general audience, but promoting it to an audience that's either working in the field or in positions to make impact, use your film to make impact. So a lot of conversations when I'm on those calls with filmmakers, introducing them to a potential partner, the thing that's on the filmmaker's mind is, how can you promote the film? What can you do for me to help me do this? This film is, going to be X amount of money for a license. And they dive right into kind of those specifics, which can be a real setback for a partner, because they might say, well, that's all you want to do is you just want to use my network to help, fund your film or to help promote your film. And I'm not really interested in that right then, because that's where you want to go, but that's not where you start. You start by, again, learning about what they do, because you also can't assume. I mean, these organizations, you can look on their website and say, oh, they're doing this or doing that. But until you talk with them, that might not be their priority. Just because it's on their website, that the work that they're doing right at that moment might not be something that's listed on their website. So the film, even though it's a good fit on paper, it might not be a good fit currently. Some of them have, and some of them have conferences or trainings that aren't on the website. So unless you talk with people about what it is that they're doing, show genuine interest in it, because you should, otherwise it's in the issue. You shouldn't take a campaign that if you're not interested in the issue. And so you're learning again from them. And then you start to say, well, gosh, I wonder if the film could benefit your members this way. And sometimes if it's an organization that they don't have much money, homelessness, working in a lot of social justice films, the organizations themselves don't have a lot of money. You can think of ways that would benefit them, maybe sponsoring them, as adding them as a partner that can be a sponsoring partner that is on some of your materials or on your website where you're giving information, that you always just want to figure out a way that you can also demonstrate support for the organization, and not just how can you help me promote something, but how can I also help you promote your services and give you credit and recognition. So those are conversations they take over time. So those conversations, though, they're not your internal core people. You're not asking them to help you develop strategy. You're not really asking them to introduce you to people. You're really learning about their particular services, their organization, and thinking about how the campaign can help them. So those conversations probably aren't going to be a lot of them. They might be off and on if the campaign isn't ready to be promoted. And that's another thing I really recommend, is that you start reaching out to people prior to the film being finished, ideally, or as it's about to go into festivals, because that also makes filmmaker organizations very exciting. Like, those pivotal partners are willing to go this bumpy ride of production with you, but other partners, they want to wait and see if the film's finished or pretty far along before they'll commit to you, but they also are willing to talk with you, and learn more while you're learning. And if that's the conversation is like, hey, I'd like to learn more. I'm an impact producer working on this film, and I do that a lot. I'll just start early on talking with people about what they're doing. And I try to, at that point, look at kind of all the different audiences that I'm thinking about and talk with people from those audiences. I'm working on a film right now that I just finished up the strategy for. It's called Greener Pastures, and it's a film about the issue of farmers and suicide, because the rate of suicide across the world with farmers and agricultural workers has really increased. And in the US, that's what it has as well. So we're looking at that. So in the strategy piece of this, the filmmakers felt really strongly that farmers were going to be the ones that would want to see the film, but they hadn't really developed relationships with any of these. So I started to look at various organizations that had that might be interested, farmers being one of them, educators in agriculture degrees, like in universities, experts, advocates, therapists, like different people that are working in that world. And what we found is that there's mixed opinion about whether the farmers would really be interested in a film like that, because it could trigger them. It could be something that wouldn't be news to them because they're already depressed and they understand what the issues are. You don't need to tell them. But the people definitely that were interested were the educators, were the people that were working in therapy, using it for training, using it for conferences. So they did feel like the story was very important to the stories they're trying to bring awareness to, and that the film could be part of that. But in terms of showing it, creating community screenings for farmers, that we shifted and said that's probably not. It'll be in the midst of things, making the mix of the campaign, but it won't be the priority of the campaign in terms of a strategy. So those are the partners. Those are people that are really willing to talk with you, but I'm not going to bother them because the film, they're interested in the film. I'll tell them when the film's made. I'll talk with them again, but it's that's that group of people. And then there are the people that that funded the film. Those are also your partners, and so you need to keep them apprised. But very often they don't want to know all the ins and outs. They just want you to report on them once in a while. And let them know that the film it's making progress in some way, in some capacity. So, and then I think the last group of people are people that maybe would be on your newsletter, or that would be smaller organizations that you've done research on, but you really don't. There's so many of them, like with the film I did with homelessness, there are lots of homeless shelters, right? But there's only a few organizations that were really our partners, that were in the core of the issue. And the film was going to be a huge opportunity for them to do a number of things. But they also had huge memberships of affiliates of other organizations that were in the communities. And so those organizations were not our partners, but we would gather the contact information, put them on newsletters. And so we would keep people apprised through newsletters, through conferences. Certainly people call you, but education is another one. You cannot expect to have partners in every in every university that has coursework on whatever the particular issues are. But you do want to keep them apprised, and you do that through direct mail, or whatever, conferences, et cetera, because that's a much wider. And those are the folks that you're hoping will, those are the ones that those organizations are promoting to. They're not going to be promotional partners, they're not pivotal partners, but they're hopefully partners that will, want to bring the film into their communities. I think sustainability has to do with obviously the budget, but it also has to do, a lot of this is the impact producer. So in order for the film to be sustainable, a large film, a large campaign that looks to make change. So some campaigns I work on make money for the filmmaker. They're more around niche distribution and looking for organizations that can use the film. A lot of times at schools or universities, elementary schools or universities where there's budgets to pay for a license, and so they are the target audience for the way you want the film to be used. But you're also selling them a license as well, and maybe they want speakers to come in, and so you're negotiating those types of opportunities for the campaign subjects or the film subjects with the filmmaker, et cetera. So those, I don't know, I would call those kind of campaigns small I, because a small I impact, because they're not measurable except for how many people did it. Sometimes it's hard to even find that out, how many people saw the film. But you don't know how the film impacted that person. It's kind of an assumption, but they are important, and they're not general distribution. They are very specific. And so I call those like small I impact campaigns, but the large I impact campaigns spend money. They don't make money at all. And so sometimes sustainability will, again, like I was mentioning about budgets being a guess, you might, and if you have a campaign that is hopeful over 2 years, and you are hoping to have $200,000 or a little more or less, but it's usually around that amount to have a film funded. So say you get $75,000 and you're still raising money, you have to think about what you're going to do. Like as an impact producer, a lot of times I'll go into that budget and say, because oftentimes we're the biggest expense on a budget campaign, because they need us to work on these campaigns. And so our work is more expensive over time, because it's a longer amount of money over time that we need to raise. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll try to stretch the money. So if I know that I have a campaign right now that we have $100,000 that we're working with. And so we went back to our budget, and our budget is about $250,000 over 2 years. And so we looked at, okay, how can we stretch that money so that we knew that the campaign is going to take at least 18 months. So we started to make decisions like, if we get no more money, how is this going to look? And so I start with myself and go, okay, well, I start to shave back some things. If we're doing their social media, we'll say, we're going to shave back on social media, or can you look for a volunteer to do social media? I know we want to do it, but it also costs money. So maybe that's a part we can shave off or do a lot less of, so that we can stretch the money. So instead of my making X amount of money a month to run the campaign, I might shave back my time to say I still get that amount of money, but I'm going to make it last longer, and I'm going to see what resources I have and where I might be able to cut. A lot of times I can work with them, or look for a partner maybe that could step in, or a friend of the campaign, etc. So I think that's one thing to do, and that has to do with budget. Another thing is to think about projects. I think developing educational materials is probably the number one, that it costs a finite amount of money. And so the money that you get could go to something like that, so that you have something finite that's packaged that you can show a funder to show that you could bring more money in. But sustainability, it is hard. It's one of the number one things that I think when impact producers get together and they talk about, how did you sustain your campaign and how did it last that long? A lot of the stories you'll hear will be that that the impact producer volunteered some of their time, or that they stayed with the campaign during gaps in funding, and they did little, but they stayed there. They continued to develop, encourage partners and have, keep those relationships going. But they might pull back a little bit and wait for the next round of funding. If the impact producer is certain that the other funding will come, they might say, I'll work for nothing right now. I'm going to suspend my payment. And then when the other payment comes in, when the other money comes in, you can pay me back. That's also tricky because a lot of funders don't want to pay backwards. They want to pay forwards. So there's different things that you can do to keep a campaign sustainable, but it's really rare that it will say sustainable without funding. So you can do creative things with the funding that you have, with the partners that you have, but there are things that you will likely not be able to do. Another thing around sustainability is that filmmakers need funding to travel now that COVID's over, definitely. But funders do not like to fund travel. So those are areas to just be careful about putting in an impact budget, our travel expenses, unless they're directly related to the campaign and the work of the campaign. Another is promotional funds, hiring a PR company or digital strategist. I think unless those are really connected to the campaign, those are always that's always line items that filmmakers want me to put in, but unless everything has to be connected to that impact campaign, because funders will see that, but it also will falsely, you need the money, you need the budget to get it. Those are also hard budgets to raise, but to put those things in an impact campaign, funders are pretty sophisticated. They'll see that and not want to fund it. And it could mean not getting your whole campaign funded if people think their money could even go to those things. Not all of them, but a lot of funders do not like to fund those areas, and they do cost money. So sometimes going back on the campaign, cutting that off might save a little money as well. But sustainability, it has to do with money, it has to do with enthusiasm, and it has to do with willingness to volunteer, I think. And when you have all of that, it's contagious. And I think the likelihood of you being sustainable for the long run is really there. Well, mistakes are hard to talk about because we all make them. And so I think what's good about mistakes is that they offer us the opportunity to reflect and go, okay, well, that was a mistake. That didn't work. That was a bomb. Let's try something new. And I think it's also hard, I think, as an impact producer, because you're getting paid to do some work. And when it doesn't turn out the way that you had hoped or dreamt, or that you had this big dream together during the strategy, it is sad. And you can say, gosh, was that a waste of money? And so I think that you have to look at, these things as opportunities, but be ready to pivot. Yes, that didn't work, but it gives us an opportunity to look at what we learned and how this is going to work. And, we're all human. Filmmakers are incredibly generous, as are funders, and they just want to, everyone knows that mistakes will happen, or that you gave it your best go and it just didn't work. And so it is, it's like science. My daughter just finished her PhD, and she worked for years on this research, and her hypothesis that after years of working on this was that her hypothesis was wrong. It was just wrong. It didn't work. But her contribution to science was huge, because that was one hypothesis that people thought would work in her world. She's in biology. So people thought, a lot of professors and smart people thought that what she was doing was going to prove that this, I can't even explain all of it, but that her hypothesis was right. And it turned out it was wrong. So, rather than, I think that's a scientific kind of a finding, and they don't see it she didn't see it at all as a mistake. She just saw it as a contribution. Like, okay, we don't have to look at that anymore. We have to do that again. Let's move on and have new hypotheses. And I think that that's how we can look at this. As impact producers, this is an art. It is not a science. There's no A plus B equals C. There's so many factors that go into success that I think some of it is changing our mentality and not calling things a mistake, but calling it, because it also evokes it's a very emotional word also, to feel like you've made a mistake. It's very triggering for everyone. We've all made mistakes, and we've all had people in our lives respond to mistakes in ways that are not helpful and that can be cruel or judgmental, and so then we learn to, my granddaughter right now is learning these lessons where she's starting to make little lies because she thinks she's going to get in trouble. And so learning that you are not going to get in trouble. So it's okay to make a mistake. That the word mistake can be very triggering for us. And so instead, when I'm talking with y'all, I'm thinking about also myself and my experiences with them, and to think more about how the things that didn't go the way you planned are a contribution to all the field. And I have a few of those that I feel like I try to tell as many people as possible, because I think they're issues where we think that we think would work, and they don't often work. So those are things that we can share with one another, so that we're saving each other time and learning, like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to bring that into the campaign. So first of all, to understand that things that didn't go well are always a contribution to the industry for sure, but the filmmakers that you're working with, and the amount of money, like part of what's good to do when I do niche impact distribution, I do A/B testing, because there's so many things we don't know. We don't know the difference between how a university is going to respond to the film, then how a social worker is, then how an administrator is. And so you have to think about messaging with those, and what are the messages that are going to be different for each of these different audiences using the same film? What's the pathway for these audiences into the film? Because it's not going to be the same for everyone. And so the messaging that you create is you have to learn it, and it's trial and error. So it's rather than jumping in to the whole thing, putting all this money in researching contacts and talking to people, it's good, I think, to start and get a handful and either talk with people individually, like, hey, I'm going to show you the film. Can I interview you and ask your opinion? What about the film was most interesting to you? What was compelling to you? What was the storyline that you most related to, et cetera? So that then going into the big campaign, you have a better, more sophisticated sense about how to talk about the film with specific audiences. So, and I see that happen all the time. Almost Sunrise was an example. The filmmakers thought very strongly that veterans, where it was a film about veterans and suicide and healing through alternative of health and practices. And so they felt very strongly that that film will be a campaign that veterans will embrace. And early on, so we ran some small pilot meetings with veterans, showed them the film. To a person, the film was not well received. It's a great film. It had some really amazing results. It was in some major film festivals, but we pivoted then. We pivoted early on in the campaign saying, okay, veterans find the film, but who is our audience? And so we found our audience was really social workers and in the social work community that are working with veterans and trying to work against a system that funds veterans' health that will not provide funding to do these alternative, like meditation classes, for example, other types of therapy rather than drugs. The social workers on the ground were trying to demonstrate the benefit of those types of services so that they could get funding by government. And so that ended up being our audience, was people that were advocating for alternative mental health, for treatment of veterans, but the veterans themselves, and looking for opportunities for them to see it, we completely pivoted off that. So, but if I would have just gone into it saying, gosh, we were a failure because veterans didn't like this film, we would have missed the point that there was an audience there. We just didn't know it at the time. And so that's it's not a mistake. It was just, we thought that it was something. It made sense that veterans makes sense that farmers would be the ones that would like a film on farming, but it's not true. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. So, and especially more in films where there are vulnerable subjects, where the issues there's an arc of issues that have to do with trauma, with depression, with sort of social economic issues, to target those audiences that are experiencing the problem that is sort of highlighted in the film is a big assumption that those folks are going to want to see a story about their own life. It can be very painful for them, but doesn't mean it's not a good story. It means that people that need to use the story are the people that are already with you trying to promote and bring awareness to the issue. So I think that, clearly as I'm talking, you can probably hear, you have to be willing to not have an ego in this and to say, I'm trying my best. This made sense. Everybody that looked at this campaign thought it made sense. We all agreed this was the way to go. And it just ended up that wasn't the exact way to go, that there's this other way that we discovered along the way. So that's that. And I think that having an honest and fierce enthusiasm, as I mentioned, is contagious, and people will be excited about that. And I think the impact producer is often the one that brings that, because we know how to talk with the people that we want to be enthusiastic with us. And filmmakers are often tired by the time they get to that point, or they're very, consumed. They've been in an editing room. Like I think about it as they've been in the dark now for a while, like looking at little micro moments in the film as they edit it. And then now when they're done with the film, they're in the bright lights, and so they're often, and they're also working on film festivals, and they're moving in that direction. So it's it just takes time, and I think they often can be tired. And so the impact producer, this is where we're really taking off. And so for us to have this fierce enthusiasm for the campaign is absolutely necessary. And so rather than say, don't be a mope, that I want to say that that your enthusiasm for the campaign and willingness to try to bring other people into your enthusiasm is fun. And people like to do that. They like to join. They like to join a cause. They at least like to hear about it because they don't work in film and they don't know how films are made. And so sometimes you're close to a film and they'll see you as part of the whole Hollywood machine, which you're not. Even documentary makers definitely aren't, but it's a fun thing anyway for a lot of people. So you can use that. You can use that. I think too, again, I already talked about having a detailed timeline. And so, I think that is having that be realistic. So, and again, thinking about things realistically is a discipline. And that is, that's what I would say is a do be disciplined. They say, shoot for the moon, hope for the best. And so you do want to be realistic when you're selling the campaign. There has to be, I think that all of the components have to make sense and they build on each other, but that they're not, here's one bucket that's completely different from this bucket that's completely, you want to be able to show how all of this is connected. And it takes a long time to be able to articulate that, to take your campaign strategy and be able to talk to someone without telling them 10 minutes worth of information. And it takes a long time. It's hard to get to simple, but you need to get there so that you can describe what you're doing in a way that can pull together multiple potentially complex kinds of change that you're trying to make, and to show how the film is central to all of them and how the things that one group is doing complements the thing that the other person's doing. Lots and lots of examples about that. But that's an area as well of looking for synchronicity, looking for leverage. I think that the best, so in terms of thinking about funders, the best funders can be past funders. So it's always important, I think, when you are talking with a funder, unless they tell you don't come back, I think to really approach them again with specificity. Your funding will do X, Y, Z. And as a result of your funding, I'll be able to move to the next level. And they'll get excited about that because they're seeing their funding going to something. So that when you get to the next level, that person's invested. Okay, I'm at this level. If I can get this much more funding, I'll be able to take these next steps. And so that's really important because it is true in all nonprofits that the best funders are prior funders. I think identifying and leveraging every potential piece of the campaign is really important because I think that sometimes impact producers are leaving opportunities on the table in terms of managing the campaign. If you have a distributor, a broadcast distributor, I like to talk with those folks because a lot of them, when people purchase the film or they purchase rights to the film or there's a planned broadcast, they're interested in the film. They're interested in the film because it's a good film and because of the issues that it represents. And so I come at it with, like you have an interest that I have. It's different. The reason I have this interest is different. The reason I'm interested in this film is because I'm interested in doing good things with it. The reason you're interested, and I'm less concerned about making money and promoting the film as a film. Well, then you have a broadcaster who's also interested in the issue, but their primary concern, the reason they're interested in the issue is because they ultimately do want to make money or bring eyes to it. But the thing you have an interest in is it, no matter whether it's up here or down here, you both are interested in the issue. So going into a conversation, for example, with a broadcaster, knowing that they have an interest in the issue, but you also know what their primary driver is, you can work with them and try and come up with creative ideas in which you can also help promote the broadcast for the theatrical run, whatever it might be, but you're going to do it in a way that will meet the mission or enhance the mission of the film or enhance the campaign or allow for certain types of messaging to come through. And so I have lots of great experience, but some really good experiences with that. And the thing about the impact, you have to be fearless. You have to be fearless in asking these questions. And that's where I think coming back to being enthusiastic about the film and what the film can do. I've had conversations with Jacinta, the film I talked about. That film was picked up by Hulu and it was picked up by ABC News. and which would then, and Hulu was then bought by the Disney Productions. So 3 major broadcast affinities that the film had, major. And so I asked to be in on those. They had nothing to do with impact. It was all about promoting the film, getting into the premieres. But I asked to sit in on those meetings so that I could really understand like what it was that each of those entities were doing in terms of Hulu, ABC News, and Disney. They all themselves had different roles in the distribution. So once I learned that, I could then go to them and say, hey, can I ask you to do this particular thing, whatever that might be. For Jacinta, it was, can you support some of the theatrical events that we are going to do with our partners? I have an organization I'm working with. They have memberships across the country. I will fill those theaters with many of those members from those organizations. And it's an opportunity, though, for those organizations to be able to promote their mission and to get press, because the film is also getting press. So it's a complicated thing, but I think it's looking at all the time for opportunities to leverage the film and help people meet their goals while they're meeting your goals, which are all about, making the mission recognized and, leveraged with some importance. And it also helps when I'm reaching out to partners to say, I'm working with a film that is on Hulu right now and Disney Corporation, ABC, and I'll put that at the very top of my letters, and that stuff opens lots of doors. So any prestigious, any sort of socially real or perceived, connections that you have with publicly known film festivals or distributors, et cetera, that the public would know. If I talk to my sister who can't understand what it is that I do, but I say, hey, I'm working with a film on Hulu that Disney, is also providing the promotion for. Oh, her eyes pick up. Oh, really? What's that one? Because she's heard of Hulu and she's heard of those. So looking for those opportunities to leverage, and people often want to do it. I've done things with HBO where you just ask what they can say no, but you'd be surprised that they're human beings. You're human beings that are interested in these issues. They might be affected by issues. They might know somebody that have a family member that's had substance abuse issues or that was homeless. So that it's not even as an organization. These are humans that you're asking them for help. You're not asking them to fund you. You're not asking them to, to do anything with your campaign. You're just asking them for help to solve this social problem that you're hoping that the film can bring awareness to, as can they, because they're in positions to do it. So those are, I think, being sure that you know how to leverage, super important. Asking for favors, super important. What's the worst, again, that somebody can say is no. Asking for favors from your friends, like I'm shameless. I'll ask my friends and my family, hey, you're good at this. Can you just do a design? We don't have any money. Can you design their website or give us like a basic design for a website? Or can you run the social media for a little while or give us a bunch of posts, like look at the film? I mean, can you do a design? Can you help us write this piece of thing? Can you introduce us to so-and-so? You have a dad or a parent or a relative. I know they're doing this kind of work. Can you introduce me to them? So all of that, just looking all the time for ways that in unusual places sometimes that you can ask people for help. And so I think that, I talked already about being sure that you're asking funders for money that do things that they can actually fund. And then, I think talking about proof of concept is sort of looking at some of the early phases where you have gone through a process of making making errors of judgment or thinking it's going to go one way and it goes to another. But when you find the sweet spot, when you find wow, that worked, that becomes then a proof of concept that you can build on. So when you're talking to a funder or somebody that you're wanting to build enthusiasm with, you don't focus on the stuff that, you were trial and error. You say, we've proven that this worked. We've proven that these partners are interested in this particular pathway to the film. And so funders do want to hear, because they want to build on success. And so now you have made a success that they're able to jump on and be excited about. I think the last thing that's always really hard is knowing when to stop. The number one time people stop is when the film has run out of money. But even then, if depending on where you're at with the campaign, I'll often stay on for a couple more months, but I'm winding down. I'm not doing active work on the campaign, but I'm responding, I'm filling in, you know, if I have something that's left over. I have a campaign now that's starting to wind down and it's run out of money, but we have a big event happening in September. And so I'll stay with the campaign and get it to September. And a lot of consultants do that. I work with a woman who's wonderful doing educational guides, and she is very, I think, generous in what she charges people to do these very complex curriculums. But she'll also, you know, when I've been on her with her in a couple of situations where the campaign ran out of money and we didn't have enough money to end up paying her, but she's like, you know, I'm just going to finish it. I love the issue. I'm enthused about what's happened. I'm just going to not charge you any more money. So, but then, you know, it's going to stop. The filmmakers might go on to another film. They're tired. The film subjects, I've had film, I mean, there's some sad stories. I've had film subjects that, you know, it's something, I think, a whole other topic, but, you know, when the film's made and the film's a story about somebody's life and it's about their life because they're experiencing a very difficult, potentially traumatic issue, and they're in a situation for a long period of time, but they're also an amazing character in and of themselves. They're interesting, they're fun to watch on screen, or that you can build a lot of empathy for the person that's having the issue. But now the film is done and everybody wants to talk to the film subjects. A lot of people would rather talk to film subjects than they would film directors, unless it's like a film festival or something that's film related. And so preparing those subjects to talk is really important, and to not assume that they're just going to be able to be put in front of an audience and everything's going to be fine because with them. And the film and the subject may be super excited about it as well, and often are, and it is exciting for them. It is wonderful that they get the attention that they deserve for participating in this film and letting their story that's very personal be being told in an incredibly public way. So it's really a gift to have those folks, but to understand also that, you know, when you think about yourself, do you want to take the most traumatic part of your life and get up over and over and over and talk about it to people that, you know, that aren't your therapists, that are strangers? And that might include news interviews, podcasts, university classrooms, conferences, etc., where they're talking about their experience. And so it's not uncommon when I'm starting to work with subjects to go into these public speaking situations that aren't film festivals. These are different, but impact types of screenings, that they be prepared and that you be listening for exhaustion, because and to understand from the film subject's perspective, the film is done at some point, sometimes a year before it's out in the public. And the subject's films, their lives go on. Sometimes the problem that they were experiencing and highlighted in the film continues to be a problem for them. So when they're asked to go speak somewhere, which is nice because it might be some funding for them, and we should also, as impact producers, always be advocating that film subjects get compensated for their work, always, even if they're they're providing expertise for the campaign or lived experience, and they're putting time in to work with you developing an impact campaign. Always, always, always advocate that they be funded, because they are life experts. And if they are providing a service that if they are making your work easier, better, richer, they need to be compensated, I believe. But we don't, as a campaign, the campaign is not compensating them to go around speaking universities. That's different. So people that are bringing a film subject in for whatever reason, you know, they're excited about the person because they know how the film ended, and maybe the film ended on a good note. But since then, some horrible things have happened, and I've seen that a lot. And so film subjects, while they want sometimes to really participate in the campaign, you might know that as human beings, they're really struggling. And so, you know, but the audience wants to see a happy ending, and they want to see that the subject is really doing well. And so sometimes film subjects want to please, and they will give a story that's not true, in terms of when people say, well, where are you now? What's happening now? And you know that things are not good, but they will feel the need to say that things are good. And so over time, asking them to do this over and over and over again is really can be very, very draining in many ways for them. And so it's always good to maintain that relationship as an impact producer with the film subject, and to see how they're feeling, to check in with them, to see, help prepare them for an event as much as possible. I have very vulnerable subjects that do like to speak. They are very good speakers. They're very knowledgeable. They're advocates within the issues, but they have a lot of trauma. And so when they're going to speak, when I have one that is, I have a film subject and a film that's going to a university right now in Colorado. And we have spoke with them at length about, needing the importance of somebody meeting this person at the airport, and not just sending them a ride and expecting that they're going to get in a bus by themselves or an Uber, even like just having somebody meet them, have somebody eat with them, make sure, like all these things that we think about, they may not have a credit card, so to make sure that the hotel is taken care of, they don't need a credit card for incidental, all these little things that people will take for granted because they're used to somebody coming in as a professional speaker, but they're life professionals. They may not have any experience going into these big places, strangers, talking to people that are very interested in them, that they may or may not feel they can tell the full truth about their life to. So to really appreciate what that experience is like, and always give them an out, and to say, you know what, you're really sounding tired. Let's not do podcasts for a couple months. Let's not do in-person events for a couple months. Let's just do Skype appearances, because you don't have to travel. You can just, you'll be in a supportive environment. So just being flexible with that. And looking for it, because people will not tell you, I'm exhausted, I don't want to do. Some maybe, but most of the folks I've worked with don't. So you just have to look for it, and know when you can help other people stop is also, I think, is part of it. That's a long answer to what not to do, but I hope that I provided a lot of things that I would hope that you would do. It's really important to develop milestones, because if you focus on the end, and if you didn't get there because of funding, because of things beyond your control, that you have set up your campaign so that you can identify change along the way. Sometimes it might be that the big change that you were hoping for never even had a chance. But because of, especially political campaigns, I have one right now that we were all set up to go with the organization. We had a very specific type of campaign, of political issue that the film was to support. Perfect fit. We had organizations on the ground that were ready to sort of bring the film into communities where there were legislators that were not in support of this particular legislation that all of us were working towards. And they decided, the Democrats on our end decided that they didn't want to support this particular legislation anymore, because there's an election coming up and they don't want to look like the other side had a win in anything. Although this was a no-brainer, it was bipartisan. So all of this work that we had leaning up to, developing the relationship, developing the opportunities on the ground, identifying those communities where the legislators weren't helpful, finding a campaign that was a winner, like finding a legislative goal that was a winning goal, that there was no reason why the film couldn't be part of being a little bit of a tipping point. And then it just stopped. And so all the work that we've been doing, it just stopped. So it doesn't mean we're doing nothing, because we had these milestones. We had milestones where the film was going to have impact in other areas. And instead of looking at federal legislation, there's also similar legislation in the states. So we've pivoted towards state change versus national. But it also it's hard. It's hard to realize when, if that would have been our only milestone, if our only milestone would have been, and at the time it might have made sense because it was so in the bag, but it didn't. But if we wouldn't have had other milestones throughout the life of this campaign, like really reaching out to, this is the film about prison multi-generational incarceration. If we hadn't developed relationships with conferences We have an educational guide that's for courts. We have for judges and for court personnel that is a very much of an impact campaign, because one of the things we identify sort of micro and macro. The macro change was legislative change. The micro change was changing in a very specific, intentional way, people that make decisions about sentencing and arrest, incarceration, whether children can meet their pay. These people that work within the criminal justice system, and this educational material is developed very specifically to help people just put it in their mind when you're thinking about sentencing, when you're thinking about taking somebody's children away, or when they're going into prison, to understand the impact on the entire family, potentially for generations, that this one small decision that you're making might have. And so the goal of this training is to reach as many people within the criminal justice system as possible, and provide the film to provide very well-resourced and researched information, with a small simple goal, which is that they consider the impact of their decision in people that aren't in front of them, the family, especially children. And so that is where we're now for the legislative one that I'm talking about. We've shifted and are putting much more of our effort, knowing also that the campaign is running out of money. We're shifting it to the work that we put together with training the criminal justice system, and that is also measurable, because part of somebody getting the film is that to take like a pre and post test, so that we'll be able to show that it did make a difference. People are thinking about this a little bit, and it's just a tiny little change. We're not asking legislative change, we're asking for a tiny little personal change in the way people make decisions. So that's we've created a campaign that had this range, right? Like it was those micro decisions, training and education in universities, a prison tour, et cetera, things we have more control over, and then legislative change. It's like money. People give money to people. They don't often give it to organizations, or at least they're going to give it to the people that they know. If it's about an organization that they support, they have all kinds of, there's a person that gives funding to homeless issues, you can't assume that they're going to give money to you because you have a film that's around homelessness. But if you develop a relationship with them and they start to really like you, they might fund you if they can. And I have funders that I work with that I can go back. I don't abuse those relationships, but I do go back to them and say, hey, I have this film that I think would be a great film to fund. And sometimes I'm hired to, to work in those films. Other times I don't, but it's worthy of being funded. So I have in terms of staying with the campaign, first, when you're developing your strategy, I guess the easy part of it is you may not need to stay with the campaign, that the strategy might be getting certain people in place that are going to take the campaign from there, and they're going to have it for a long time. So a nonprofit or an advocacy organization, we have one that I did that with the film Home Stretch, where we created a guide that was developed for one of our partner organizations that had film that was developed as a film-based curriculum. We took chapters, etc., which, by the way, we leveraged our broadcaster to pay for us to do that. But then that campaign was all about giving that project to this organization. And they distributed it. It was for their membership. So there's nothing I needed to do beyond leverage our opportunities to put something in place that could be useful to this partner that involved the film that they are taking and running with it. If you're doing a film around legislative, you have to decide yourself how long you're willing, and if you can financially stay with something. And so that is, that's definitely part of staying with the campaign. Sometimes your role might shift from strategist to oversight. This is where some of the different, I don't particularly like to, in fact, I just don't like to come into a campaign and be the manager of the campaign, where I'm working with other contractors on behalf of the film and they need somebody to manage it. I don't like doing that. It's not a creative process. But it is needed. It's important. They're sticking to a budget. They're also talking to funders. I can do those things, but I like to be doing work too. But some campaigns really just need somebody like that. So I might come in do the campaign. Happens a lot, actually. I've done multiple campaigns like that, where I've developed the campaign and then other people are running it. It might be too big of a campaign for me to run. It's another way that I'll decide whether I can stay with it, that I know this campaign is way bigger than me. I did a good job with the strategy. I have partners in place that can do it, but they really need something to take it to a level that I can't take it. Another thing is to know your own learning curve. If you're developing strategy, you learn to be an expert in the development of that strategy somewhat within the issue. But in terms of being somebody that's deeply embedded, a lot of environmental films are like this. I can come in, and I've done this. I come in and I'll develop a strategy that's around a campaign that's an environmental film, but there's a huge, obviously, world of people that are working in the issue of climate change. So I am not the one that would be best served. The film would not be best served by having me run a campaign in which the expertise is off the roof, and there are so many people that can understand how to take media and use it to promote there. So in those campaigns, I don't stay with. So those are the sort of technical reasons. The personal reasons are honestly, at that point when I've developed a strategy, and I never take a film when I start to say I never commit to doing the whole thing, ever, never commit to doing the whole thing, because it's a love story when you come together with the filmmaker, when they come together with the impact producer. You've worked, you've had conversation, you decided you really like the filmmaker, you kind of vibe with each other, but you don't know how that's going to go for the long haul. And I have had, fortunately, not hundreds or not even half, I'd say it probably 10 of the 50, 60 campaigns I've worked on that I can jump in my head right away, is I can say I knew by the time the strategy was over, I wanted nothing else to do with the project. And never because of the issue, because I only take films that I'm interested in the issue, but it's because of the filmmaker, and our personalities just don't fit. And so there's no way I would move on with because that's a mistake. I would say that's an outright mistake that I've made, is believing that I could change somebody or that I could make something happen that I didn't like the people that I was working with to make it happen. And sometimes it's the same way. I mean, they can feel the same way about us. And it is often, not often, but when you're in a situation like that, it's pretty clear that you're both kind of hitting heads. But I think as the impact producer, it's going to be you to be the one to step back and to know I have a really long rope, which isn't necessarily helpful to me, which means I will give people a long rope to be not the best personality, but once it hits a point, then I'm done. And so that's a problem I have, because I probably should set some of those things up front. But I've had situations that I've like literally fired the filmmaker, just a couple where I fired them. Others that I've just said, thank you for the opportunity of doing your strategy. And I'm here, let me know if you have any questions or you need to work with other people, but this is the time that we part because I have other projects, or whatever excuse you want to give. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but never take a campaign unless you know it. The people for a long time, work with them on other situations where you promised in the beginning to see it through. Put your own time in milestones and to say, I'll make a judgment when I get to this point. And then you'll make a judgment based on personality, the amount of time it's going to take, how big the project is, whatever those decisions are for you. I have multiple campaigns I'm working on at the same time. So unless somebody's paying me really, really, really well, I can't stop everything I'm doing to just focus on one campaign. So that would be an example where I'd say, you need somebody bigger, you need to hire an organization, a PR company, whatever it might be, but it's not going to be me. When you start to realize what the impact is, that the impact that you've wanted has happened, or that it's largely going to happen, or that you were, the film was part of sort of that tipping point in decision, program change, whatever. And you see that, I think that's kind of mission accomplished. You've done it. And you are tired. Also, it takes a long time to get to those campaigns. You've probably started others at that point that are maybe taking up more of your interest because it's new and it's, these campaigns we work on are around hard issues, like how long do you want to spend thinking about, farmers that kill themselves? How long do you want to spend working on that issue. So it might be tiring, and you kind of know that that's ending. I think sometimes it's something as simple as, because these are long campaigns, that the people that were your sort of core partners have taken other jobs. And so it would mean starting all new relationships with people towards the end of the campaign. So that's another sign that, it's wrapping, it's sort of nature's telling you that it's organically kind of wrapping up. I think that, it's, I think that they are hard to let go of, like the one that I was talking about with multi-generational incarceration. I've been with them for 5 years. I am friends with deep friends with our primary partners. I am really good friends with the filmmakers. We're all in it together. We're all sad that we're running out of money. So I am helping to raise money for it, but which I don't usually do. But it's sad, and it will have to come to an end. But again, I think that's where milestones come in. And then I think you have a party, you celebrate it somehow. Like if the filmmakers are in Los Angeles, then we go out to eat quite a bit anyway, but we might have it be something special. And you just have to honor, where you've gone. But it is sad. Like I said, some films you can't end fast enough. Other films, again, it depends on the impact campaign. Like if you're doing like a small eye campaign where you're doing niche promotion, you may have just gotten to the point that as many people that would want to see the film based on those activities have seen the film. They've seen the film. So why spend money on me? Why spend more energy on the campaign? We've done really well. I think it's all organic. You do have to end at one point, and this is where impact producers are very, very different, very different. There are some that are like me that will just hang in there because we're passionate about a particular issue. And there are others that are living the issue. If they're activists, this is their life. So the film was part of the work that they've done, but they're also, embedded in the issue, and especially something like climate change. So their work is going to continue. They're going to continue to use the film. So that part of the campaign, so that the baby has gone off to good. You've handed your baby over to someone else, and it's going to be used really well. Sometimes there's contractual reasons also, like the film was scheduled to go into educational distribution, which means there's so many restrictions with educational distributors that you can't really do an impact campaign anymore. So if there's a fixed time, like 6 months, then it's going to go out for educational release. Then that could be where the campaign stops. But it is hard. It is really hard with a long campaign to kind of say goodbye. But honestly, by the time it comes, filmmakers and us, it's a long time that you have lived with a very difficult issue and talked about it, thought about it. It's in your life, and you need some happiness. I always tell filmmakers when they're done with the film, like something like homelessness or intergenerational incarceration, they should do a film about kittens, or something happy, magic, something that's really a lot lighter, because it's hard. You're living with something for a long time, and so it's kind of over. But it's sometimes it's a very concrete over, the contract's over, you predicted what it's going to be, unless they can come up for more money, you're really done. It was a good campaign, everybody's happy, but it just kind of ends. You knew where it was going to end when you started. In other campaigns, it's a long relationship that hopefully is not a dysfunctional one, that you have, that you're going to be really proud of what you've done and recognize that it's over.